Okay, thank you, everybody. I see a magic number on my screen. I'm not sure that you can, but it tells me that we have participants on this Zoom call, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this virtual open day about a new program which is starting next year in 2022 for an MA in Buddhist art history and conservation. And hello, Samantha, and hello, everybody from online. My name is Austin Nevin, and I'm the head of conservation here at the Courtauld, and I'm joined today by Stephen Whiteman, who is saying hello, and he is my esteemed colleague in art history, who is the head of the PhD program, as well as an expert in Chinese art history. And I'm going to present to you today some of the course and the department, because I'd like to encourage you to consider applying to do this course if you're interested in this combination of art history and conservation, which we teach in this MA. And I'd like to start off by saying this is an MA which is hosted at the Robert H&O Foundation here at the Courtauld, and it is also thanks to the foundation that we have been able to appoint 2 new staff members who will be teaching on the program. And I'm telling you this now because I am here as the head of conservation, but the program will be taught together with colleagues who will be joining the Courtauld imminently. So we're very excited about that. Now, why did we set up this program? What was the purpose of this? And why is this such an important topic to consider for an MA? Why would you do this? One of the reasons is that we recognize that it's not very easy to study a subject as vast as Buddhist art history and conservation without having to specialize in one or the other. And therefore, bringing the two together at the Courtauld, we allow students who have already studied a previous degree to focus on these 2 topics of art history and conservation, because we feel there's a strong need to be able to address the conservation of Buddhist sites, wall paintings, and conservation of Buddhist heritage, which otherwise we don't really have the specialization for that elsewhere. And you can study conservation if you want to, but you don't necessarily specialize in Buddhist objects, or you can study Buddhist studies, but then you won't necessarily have either art history or conservation. So if you're interested in both subjects, we have one of the unique programs in this field at the Courtauld. And Courtauld has a long history of working on Buddhist sites, Buddhist wall paintings. And this is an example of which you might recognize from Dunhuang, where the Courtauld has been working for the last 2 decades in some of the cave paintings together with the Getty Conservation Institute. And this example really shows how complex Buddhist sites are. If I think about the Buddhist sites that I visited, Dunhuang is up there at the very top in terms of its complexity, its richness, and the diversity of the thousands of years of paintings that are there, and also the conservation challenges that sites like Dunhuang face, the growing number of tourists, the exposure to the elements, and the very rich physical history that is encompassed in this site. We have sculptures, paintings, and of course the manuscripts, which are now dispersed around the world. But Dunhuang is only one example. We also have many other Buddhist wall paintings. These are from Tibet, and we see here one of the critical issues that we face when trying to conserve and to study wall paintings of this kind. Look how big this painting is. It's a massive wall painting in a temple in Dratang, and in northern India, I believe. And we can see here what has happened to this painting. Very common that something happens to the building structure, and we can see the damage to the surface of the painting because of water infiltration. But this is a monastery. It's a monastery which is being used by monks, and there's increased pressure to do something about these damaged paintings. But what can be done? What are the principles that we need to consider when working on Buddhist sites and working with communities? What are the principles that we need to take into account when thinking about conservation of places which are very remote? What materials should we use? What are the factors that we can try to prevent so we can stop this from happening in the future? What are the other aspects that conservation requires that we consider? And what about the art historical questions here? Who painted these paintings? What do they mean? Why? When? We can see another example in the next slide, down here, of a detail of this fantastic, very, very large wall painting, which I know very little about. This is not my specialization, but other people at the Institute are much better prepared to speak about the iconography and also about the materials that were used, the materials that the painters used to create these art paintings, the ways they planned them, and the ways that they have changed in time. We have another detail here of these absolutely fantastic wall paintings. Of course, there are other paintings nearby in Nako, which the Courtauld was also involved in the study of these other wall paintings. And you can see here both the condition of these paintings, the large crack in them, but I think you can also appreciate the absolutely exquisite painting of the details. There's gilding. We have multiple paint layers. We have pigments that you find imported from other areas of the world that may have come over the mountains or from the valleys. And this questions about where materials came from and how they were used and who learned how to apply them in a certain way. And the fact that we have gilding at the very top of the mountains in Nako means that somebody brought gold and applied it very specifically to specific areas of the paintings. And they could do that in different ways. They could apply it as gold leaf or gold foil, as gold paint, and so on and so forth. And those questions are the types of questions we try to investigate when we talk about the techniques of these paintings. Here we have another different example of, and I think you're appreciating the variety of types of wall paintings that we might have, even in a very small region in the Himalayas. And recently, the Courtauld was also involved in a project in Bhutan. Here we see the view over the valleys near Tango in Bhutan. And this wall painting in Tango is particularly significant. And it was a place where the Conservation of Wall Painting Department worked during pre-COVID on the wall paintings in Bhutan. And this brought with it many challenges, including, for example, the documentation and the imaging of the paintings. How do you take a picture which will somehow allow you to study the paintings afterwards and communicate the size and extent of these wall paintings, the condition of those paintings? It's not straightforward, but this is something that the conservation students are doing. And one of the aspects of the degree, which I think is particularly exciting for me, is that the degree in art history and conservation will be taught alongside the degrees that we have at the Courtauld in art history and in wall painting conservation or easel painting conservation. So here you see an example of wall painting conservators who are documenting the paintings in Tango, and you will learn as part of the MA how to use the data that is being generated and how also to think about the principles behind the conservation of these paintings. And here you can see a detail again of this, these Bhutanese paintings, and I think you can appreciate the gilded relief that we have on the surface of the painting itself and the very, very fine brushwork that was, and you can almost imagine how the painter would have painted individual paint strokes. But here, another major aspect of the conservation of Buddhist sites, and indeed any sites where we have communities, is working together with, in this case, monks who inhabit and who use and who are the major stakeholders of this temple in Tanko. We have our graduate, Karma, who is sharing and explaining some of the data that has been collected to the monk. And this is something that is very much a focus of the principles and the theory of conservation. How do we work with communities? How do we work and engage with communities and allow the communities to be empowered to make decisions and to appreciate both the significance and also the key factors that will ensure that conservation of sites allows them will limit their damage in the future. So communication and working together with the communities are aspects of the program which are very important. And here you can see Karma also explaining the paintings, the significance of the paintings to a group of visitors, which is very much an aspect of the program which we'd like to focus on. And the department has also been involved in this subject for a long time. You can read Art of Merit, a publication which was edited by the former heads of department, David Park and Sharon Cather, together with Kwengo Wangmo, which contains a very large collection of essays on different aspects of the challenges of studying and conserving Buddhist art, and why it is that working with communities across Asia and the globe is so very important. And I'd also like to highlight two recent events that we've held at the Courtauld, which gave me a broader perspective on the subject of the conservation and study of texts and of Tankos, which you can see Tangas in the second presentation. So do search the research forum, which gives you a flavor of some of the scholarship which is going on today in the study of the very, very vast heritage that we call Buddhist arts, and also some of the challenges that we have in conserving and in approaching these types of objects. I'm going to pass now on to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, which was more an overview of some of the work that has been done in the department and that is going on. I'm going to share pass over to Stephen, who'll give you a brief description of how the conservation department works with the art history department, which Stephen is representing. And then I'll come back to you to describe a bit more about the course itself.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Austin, and thank you all for coming. As Austin mentioned, I am the specialist at the Courtauld in early modern Chinese art and architecture, and as such have had the great pleasure of contributing to the organization and planning for this new degree in Buddhist art history and conservation, which I'm really excited to see start next year. And so what I want to do, and what I was asked to do, is talk a little bit about collaborations, as Austin said, between conservation and art history, and also tell you a little bit about the art history side, particularly with respect to the arts of Asia at the Courtauld. It is not, I mean, many of you may associate or may have associated in the past the Courtauld as an institute that focuses largely on the study of European art. And while that for many years was true, in fact, way back at the starting of the Courtauld, the founding of the Courtauld in 1930, the very first degree in art history offered in the field of art history offered in the United Kingdom was in Chinese art at the Courtauld. And that was the first degree we offered and the first degree in art history here. And in the 1930s, the study of not just Chinese art, but art in Asia really flourished at the Courtauld before moving to SOAS after World War II under reorganization of the University of London. I say that because, as Austin suggested, not only because it's a sort of interesting fact, but as Austin suggested, the Courtauld's involvement in Asia has been much longer and much deeper than certainly I was aware of before I joined the Courtauld faculty. As Austin has mentioned, the conservation department in particular has been working in India and South Asia, the Himalayas, for a number of years, particularly with a focus on site-based conservation and community connections and involvement, which is the sort of foundation, as he described, that we're building off of. And for me, I think that the expansion of art histories of Asia have been built on many of the same principles, on a close attention to materiality and the material object, which is true of Courtauld art historians in general. I think that Courtauld art history begins with the object and builds to theory, and not the other way around, if I can broadly characterize how a lot of us work. We're very, very attentive to the object, and we're very interested in teaching in front of objects, with objects, and thinking about the evidence the material and visual object provides us, in addition to other forms of evidence that we work with. And so when Austin and I, neither Austin nor I have been at the Courtauld for terribly long, and but when we both joined and started to talk, one of the things we became very interested in, even before the design of this Buddhist program, was how we could work together with our shared interest in Chinese art to bridge and create connections between art history and conservation, particularly in the study of Asian art. And so I think you're seeing here the first great product of that idea, which hopefully will continue to grow in years to come. Courtauld Asia, which is the sort of study cluster for the study of Asian art, at the research cluster for the study of Asian art at the Courtauld, is small, but really happily about to double in size, and I think is going to continue to grow quite substantially. Currently, there are 3 faculty members who specialize strongly in Asian art, as well as a number of other faculty who have related interests relating to connections between Europe and Asia. The 3 specialists are Dr. Wenny Teo, who is a specialist in contemporary Chinese art, Professor Suzanne Babei, who is a specialist in the arts of Islam in Iran, and myself working on early modern Chinese art and architecture in sort of global context. And particularly with regards to early modern Asia or pre-modern Asia, Professor Babei and I have been working very hard on a series of initiatives that emphasize trans-Asian connections and links that don't that continue what we might think of as the cross-regional or global turn in art history, but without particularly centering Europe in that relationship, but instead looking at intra-regional connections and focusing very much on local art histories. And the Buddhist program is a perfect example of this, as Buddhism, of course, is a quintessential example of cross-cultural migration within Asia. And its study really requires the recognition of this cross-culturality or this transculturality. And so that's one thing that we are working very hard on in other areas that will complement the Buddhist program, but also the Buddhist program is going to complement what we are already doing, if you see what I'm saying. And so the teaching of the program is, I think, going to emphasize both of these aspects, both these sort of areas of local specialization and this transculturality. Buddhism, of course, as a field is far larger than can be taught in one MA or 1 year MA or a lifetime of MAs. Well, maybe not a lifetime of MAs if that was what you were after, but we cannot do justice to all the different local instantiations in deep detail. And so one of the portions of the program is going to be a survey of Buddhist art, a survey from its origins in South Asia to at least some of its local extensions in Northeast and East Asia, in Southeast Asia, in the Indian Ocean, and even perhaps in the contemporary world. Seeing these sort of ways in which Buddhism migrates and transforms or evolves over the course of space and time is one of the ways in which one of the areas in which art history is able to give really sort of extraordinary insight through the study of this movement. And so certainly the specialist who joins us in the coming months will give some shape to that through their own interests, but they will also be offering a sort of broad picture across a variety of different contexts to the program. But at the same time, we really specialize. One of the things that makes the teaching and study of art history at the Courtauld really special, I think, is that we really allow specialists to do their own thing. At many schools, a person who's in my position as the Asianist, I might be the only person who taught Asia. I would be expected to teach all of Asia from early period to contemporary across vastly different cultural contexts, which is an extraordinarily difficult, maybe impossible thing to do. Here at the Courtauld, we really recognize the importance of in-depth specialization. And so, for instance, I teach early modern China. And if I wish to expand out of that, I can. But that's really the area that I'm responsible for. And likewise, in addition to teaching this survey, the specialists that we hire to join the art history faculty will have a specialism of their own and will offer more intensive classes on that in those areas as well. And so there'll be an opportunity to sort of build in dialogue, build your own interests in dialogue with faculty members, not only with the specialist who joins us, but also with other people in the history of art department, such as myself or Professor Babe, other people in the conservation department who are interested in wall painting or other types of conservation, et cetera, et cetera. So the faculty will be joining a larger Asia-oriented group of staff who together will be supporting students in this MA as well as in a number of other MAs. I guess the last thing I would say is also, although the MA in Buddhist art and conservation is particular among our current offerings in its joining of conservation and art history, which is, I just think, so exciting. It will also be part of a much larger constellation of MA programs, including MAs in early modern China, early modern Islam, contemporary Asia, all sorts of other pre-modern subjects, medieval and early modern, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's really a large community of scholars that you'll be joining when you come to the Courtauld. So I think that unless I've missed anything that you wish me to expand upon, that's enough for me. And
that's
I will
fantastic, Stephen.
pass it back to you, Austin.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that you've really enthused. If I were younger, I would probably have wanted to do this kind of thing. But as it is, I'm very taken with what you said, Stephen, and the fact that you would be joining a community of the leading young scholars who are specializing in different subjects. And I thought I'd talk to you briefly about how the program is actually going to be constructed and what it's based on. And I think that Stephen gave you a very good idea of the art historical foundation on which you will sit in the MA, which is a strong focus both on broad knowledge of trends and the history of Buddhist art, but also specific knowledge on particular periods, particular sites, which will incorporate material study and conservation within that framework. But there's also a foundation in conservation which you will need to gain, which we don't expect you to have before you come. And what is that foundation that you can gain in 1 year? Or what do we think are the key principles that you need to learn? One of them is about what I've just mentioned, principles and theory of conservation. What are the principles that you need to learn about and know about when approaching sites? What are the principles that you need to know about when approaching an object, which may have its own sensitivity and histories? What about restoration or conservation? How do those fit in with the notion of religious significance? What about the study of these objects and how does that relate to the long-term preservation of them? So these are questions that you will focus on in a course focusing on principles and theory of conservation. We also have a course on materiality, materials that are used, how are objects made, or how are wall paintings made? What are the materials how are they made? Are they from the earth, from straw, from pigments, from binders, from gilding, from varnishes, from lakes, etc., etc. And the focus will be predominantly on sites and wall paintings, but there will also be a survey of other types of objects. And one of the real challenges in a program of 1 year is, how can we teach you everything about everything? We can't. What we do is we lead you and guide you so you can learn and investigate these objects yourselves. So if you have a particular interest in paper, we are not going to be teaching paper conservation per se, but we will be able to guide you to information so you can do seminars on the creation and the technologies of paper, which you could spend your entire life researching if you wanted. And another aspect of conservation, which I feel is essential for the subject, is what we call preventive conservation. Preventive conservation, which relies on trying to understand the large risks that any site and object have, and to understand what we call the agents of deterioration, whether that is light, fire, floods, theft, earthquakes, humidity, temperature, and so on. And understand how you, after this, will be able to master some of the methods that we have in conservation to identify and to mitigate risks. So those are the three major components in conservation which would accompany the art history learning. And there's another aspect of the course which is, of course, fundamental. As it's a course about Buddhist art history and conservation, we will also be teaching some of the fundamental aspects of Buddhism. Now, this is not a degree which requires that you learn Buddhist languages or have an encyclopedic knowledge of Buddhist iconography, but instead we will be introducing core aspects of Buddhism which we feel are essential both to understand what Stephen was describing, this transculturality and migration of ideas and notions, but also how to approach both the art history and the conservation of living objects and living sites which have active religious significance. So I hope that has given you an overview of the course. Of course, I forgot to mention now, see, I'm getting ahead of myself, the major component of any MA degree at the Courtauld, which is your own research. Your own research is 30% of the degree, 60 out of the 180 credits in this case, and that is absolutely part of any MA degree. It's a research degree, and that means that you will be doing research, and you will be supervised by by conservation staff as well as art historians in your degree, and that's one of the reasons that we've extended the degree from a 9-month degree, which is the typical MA at the Courtauld, but to a 12-month degree. So you have more time to potentially go work in the field, go work on Buddhist sites, or study specific objects and collections. So you have a bit longer to actually spend on the writing of your dissertation. And you will have specific supervision as part of that to guide you in doing this, this very important exercise and learning to do research. And I would say that in that context, this is an enabling degree for you to do whatever you want afterwards. If you find that research is something that you particularly like and excel at, and you want to develop that further, this is the kind of degree which will allow you to do a PhD. If instead you decide that what you really want to do after all is conservation, this is the type of degree which would allow you to then join a conservation program. And if instead you decide that this is something which is essential for you to embark on a career, the idea behind this degree is that it will give you a foundation on which to build and learn more about management of sites, preventive conservation, but also how to engage with Buddhist objects and Buddhist art in a more general way. So I thought I would now, before answering questions, just very briefly go through some of the admissions issues that you might want to know about. And I would normally be joined by our admissions team, but they have unfortunately come down with some flu or something else, which I hope is very transient. So we have some topics here. First of all, how to apply. Well, our applications will be online and they will be launched very soon. And we can email you with details about them as soon as the online portal is open. The one issue that we do want to remind you of is that you have to have a good degree, good first degree, either a 2-1 in your first degree or an overall average of about 65% in the UK or above. If you're coming from abroad, we would welcome you. You need to have a GPA coming from the States of 3.5 or above, or an equivalent of a 2-1 degree in the UK. And if you have any questions about this in terms of your qualifications, please feel free to email the pgadmissions@courtauld.ac.uk. You'll need to apply online. As I mentioned, this should be open within the next week, and the details about what you need to include in your application on the portal. And you'll have a little bit over 2 months to do that application. The deadline for the applications is actually slightly after Christmas. So this gives you plenty of time to think about it, and also plenty of time to get in touch with us if you have specific questions. For the application itself, what am I looking for? What is Stephen looking for in when we consider your applications? Well, first of all, we'd like to know why you want to do this degree. And you have a personal statement where in 500 words, we ask you to describe your personal motivation for this, which can be your very much personal reflection on why you want to do this, and also to highlight any information that you think we should know about in assessing your application. And we'd like then your academic transcripts, as well as references, which reflect your academic references, or also your professional references if you're not coming directly from an academic program. Your CV is also required as part of your application, as is, if you're not a native English speaker, English language test results. And this is very important because this is a degree taught in English, so we require that you have a level of English which is sufficient so that you're able to complete this. Now, Stephen, you're going to raise your hand.
I was just going to say, if your English exam, if you do need to demonstrate an English requirement, you don't necessarily have to have done that by the admissions deadline, but that's nice if you're able to. If some portion of the requirement, actually, this is true for any requirement, if some portion of the requirement is missing at the application deadline, don't, such as you haven't finished your first degree or you haven't taken your English exam yet, don't worry, just submit. And then you'll be given, if you're admitted to the program, your admission will be conditional on ultimately providing the results of your first degree, the results of your English exam, something like this. So don't feel as though, and again, as Austin said, if there are any questions about this, is there an exception? Do I have to have this? Writing to pgadmissions@courtauld.ac.uk. They'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions about the mechanics. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
That's very, very helpful, Stephen. I think it's good to remind you that this is very much, we expect people to apply in different times in their lives, so that you may not have the degree finished or the English certificate yet. So that's okay. But if you need the English language certificate, you'll need it for any MA program in the UK. So this is quite important for you to plan. Also, passport and visa details are essential if you are already in the UK. That's one. If you instead want to come from abroad, we can help you once you're on the program to get all the documents you needed to be able to attend the Courtauld, but that's something we need to know about in advance. Now, we typically allow 2 weeks between after the deadline for references to be sent. So you don't have to have the references in immediately on the 17th of January, but you'll need to provide them shortly thereafter, or I think that your references are contacted to upload their references online, and then we'll receive the application, Stephen and I, and we'll go through them, and we expect to make a decision about your place on the course in February or March, so you have plenty of time to plan your lives. Regarding funding, and this is very important, the way we administer scholarships, which we have at the Courtauld, we have specific scholarships for this program, which makes it a particularly attractive program, is that your scholarship application is considered after your admissions application is accepted. And so we then will consider you, if you've been accepted on the program, we can consider you for a scholarship. You can find details about the fees online, which do depend on where you're from, unfortunately. So home fees are a certain level and overseas fees are different. And you can see there's the links to funding opportunities on the Courtauld page. Sometimes there are specific fundings that you can find from other places. And I think that's all I need to say about admissions at the moment. But I see that there are already some questions showing up on the chat, which I think we can start going through. But I would ask you very much to put your questions here if you feel that they are general questions, and even if they're specific, and we'll try to answer them. So maybe I'll start with the question. I've got a very long question here from somebody about the degree. So the first question I'll ask is, do we have a chemistry background? Absolutely not. I studied chemistry actually for my first degree, and I would never want someone else to have to do that if he didn't want to or they didn't want to. You do not need chemistry for this degree. The knowledge that we expect you to have is more general interest in materials, but you do not need a chemistry degree. And the second question from, I'm not sure how to pronounce your first name, but I'll say Boo, is that is foreign language proficiency a prerequisite before being accepted? Do you need to know Tibetan language or Chinese or Sanskrit? No, you do not. If this is not, and this is not at all a requirement for this program. In discussions with colleagues who work in Buddhist conservation, it would be impossible for conservators to learn all the languages and dialects they would need to learn if they didn't have access to fantastic translations or translators. So my response to that, and maybe Stephen has a slightly different, he can, I'm sure, add to this, is that if you do know a language, that is fantastic. You will be bringing richness to your studies. If you do not know a language, do not worry about it, because this is not, you cannot learn a language in a year, and we don't expect you to be able to have specific language knowledge to be able to engage with the texts and the work that we will be doing here.
Otherwise, all I was going to add was that many students do take a language while they're on a Courtauld MA. And in this case, both the London School of Economics, LSE, and SOAS, among other institutions, support us very well. And so students are free to enroll in a class in a foreign language. And indeed, particularly if they have research aspirations beyond the MA, a art historically oriented PhD, for instance, then indeed they're encouraged to do so, because languages certainly are a necessity for PhDs. And it should be said that though, just as a sort of flagging up future plans, a expansion into a significant center for Buddhist art history and conservation includes the hope that we will continue to have PhD students. We have a number of PhD students working in Buddhist art right now, and supported by the HoFam Foundation, and we certainly hope that we will continue to attract students in that field in the future.
So that's a very good answer, Stephen, and I think you highlighted another important point, which is this is a moment of expansion at the Courtauld. Regarding your question number 3, which is also a good one, for the 10,000 word dissertation. So students' topic must be a combination of art history and conservation. No, my view is that your topic will be something that you can define with supervision from lecturers on the program. And if you happen to have a specific interest in one or the other, you will be encouraged to engage with that. My view, though, is that one of the real strengths of the degree is that it allows you to become more knowledgeable and proficient in both aspects of conservation and art history. And perhaps it would be useful just for me to say that when I speak about conservation, I also intend that to mean understanding the material nature of an object, which is very much part of the focus of the art historical research that we would do. So the border between between conservation and art history can sometimes be rather fuzzy. So I would say that you don't need to think that you're going to be specializing in a specific aspect of one or the other. And your third question is about, after completing the MA, if we were accepted a PhD at the Courtauld, must our research be also a combination of Buddhist art history and conservation? No, you can do whatever you want for your PhD, but you need to have a good MA to do it, and you also need to have a supervisor to do it. So I would say that this is an enabling degree, which would allow you to decide your own future, which could be in aspects which I don't know yet. And I would not expect you to necessarily know. Actually, I would be rather suspicious if you thought you already knew what you did your PhD. Why do you need an MA then? But I would say that the MA opens so many doors in your mind and in your lives. You just don't know where they'll take you. So I think you'd be able to specialize. And so I think one of the aspects of the MA dissertation generally, which is particularly exciting, is that it allows you to bring to the Courtauld something new.
What I would say, just as both as the head of the PhD, and so therefore I field a lot of these questions, and also as a supervisor in a related field, it wouldn't be difficult to imagine that someone coming out of this program would come to me as the China specialist and say, I'd like to do a PhD with you. My view, first of all, is that I and many other people, many other art historians in general, I think are very open to what we might describe as technical art history that draws on the types of information that conservators gather and scientific study of painting or works of art. But the other thing is that even if I weren't at the Courtauld, if I were a potential PhD supervisor and a student from this program came, at the very least, what I would say is this is a student with a really interesting background that is very much geared them towards thinking about works of art in their physical context, thinking about the material construction of works of art. This is someone who is not just going to study art history from a book and from photographs, but is really interested in getting out there and understanding the work, the physical work itself. And I think that many, many art historians would view that very favorably. And I think that also many conservation PhD supervisors, who I know a little less well since that's not my field, would be similarly excited by a conservation student who really understood something about art history and had studied art history and had thought about these objects from an art historical perspective. Because the truth of the matter is, we can't do a work separately. Though other institutions don't stage this conversation the way the Courtauld does, and that's one of the things that's really special about the Courtauld, I feel, as a person who's relatively new to the faculty. The fact of the matter is that art historians and conservators need each other and should be in dialogue with one another, and which I think is, again, one of the really sort of unique but also exciting parts about this program. And about the structure of the Courtauld more generally, which really there are only a couple of institutions in the world that have this type of marriage between conservation and art history at quite this level.
I think that's absolutely right, Stephen. I would say that conservation is often a subject that you have to study having very technical skills, and you won't necessarily have the overlap with this very strong art history department. So if you want to do conservation of Buddhist art, you would have to go somewhere else and maybe specialize in a very specific type of material, and it would take a much longer time. But I would also be wrong to assume that you are practicing conservators after this degree, because this is more kind of fundamental grounding in conservation principles, which would allow you then to build that knowledge in further research, if you so desired. Now, one of the questions from Lucia here is if we have collaborations with other universities. I think Stephen mentioned that we are part of the University of London, which gives us a huge level of collaboration within this massive city in terms of resources. So as a University of London student, you have access to the libraries, you have access to different courses if you so wish, but we also have long-standing collaborations internationally with the Dunhuang Academy, for example, in Gansu province in China, with universities in China and other institutes in Asia. And that, I think, it's especially exciting when we're able to travel, but it is also important now when we aren't, because we have very strong connections with international organizations as well as national bodies. So that means that we are uniquely positioned to be able to offer access to sites, access to materials, as well as we have a very large network of colleagues around the globe, which is quite unique. I have another question, maybe Stephen can answer better than I. If we were accepted onto a PhD after having completed the course, would the MA qualify as the first year?
The answer to that is no. The PhD requires an MA, unlike an American PhD, and I'm not sure where, Samantha, you're calling in. Oh, from Cambridge, I knew this because you said hello earlier. Unlike the American PhD, which requires MA level coursework prior to the beginning of the dissertation, the United Kingdom PhD is a dissertation only and requires an MA for admission. And therefore your MA qualifies as essentially as that, an admissions requirement. The PhD then follows on from that and is a 3 to 4 year program that is focused on the dissertation only. And I should say, by the way, because I imagine actually there are a reasonable number of people in the room, I try not to sell PhDs too hard to people who are prospective MA students, because there are so many things you can do with an MA and so many things beyond or besides the PhD. But I also recognize that when you're talking about a MA such as this, you're talking to a group of prospective students who have very specific, often, ideas about where they might like to go, and so what they might like to go on to do after the MA. And so I guess I should say we do have a good number of people who apply straight out of the MA into the PhD program. Also a good number of people who take a year off between the MA and then return for their PhD, which, especially if you need additional languages, can be a really great way to go. It gives you a little bit more time to develop your proposal, perhaps travel to Asia, develop language abilities, et cetera, et cetera. But while for sure we see ourselves, the MA program sees itself as preparing students for and encouraging students to apply to PhDs around the world. And we send students to PhDs around Europe and in America and in Asia and lots of other places. We also hope that a certain number of our MAs will stay with us and see this as a continuous program of sorts, or at least a linked pair of programs, and continue on with their work here at the Courtauld. And if you develop a great connection with a supervisor here, or a possible supervisor here, that can be a really positive outcome, especially if you like the particular art historical approach and conservation approach that we take here, which in a field such as Buddhist studies, perhaps this is something that we haven't said, there is, of course, a long history of Buddhist studies in the United Kingdom, with venerable centers at Oxford, at SOAS, and at other institutions. I think one of the things, in addition to the connection to conservation, which is very, very important, but perhaps stemming from that, is that genuinely, I think that the Courtauld is doing it differently, is offering a substantively different approach that is much more art historically oriented, that connects much more to the material object, to site-based research, to community-connected research, the types of things that Austin was talking about in his opening remarks, and things that we have a long experience doing, in part facilitated by these close connections with institutions on the ground, like the Dunhuang Academy or like centers in South Asia. And I say that because some of you will also be considering other programs at other institutions. And one of the things you'll want to think about is what makes this different from Oriental studies at Oxford or Himalayan studies at Cambridge. And I think that sort of connection to a community of art historians and conservators is one of the most important things that makes the Courtauld program really different, and of course to us really attractive.
That's right. I think that's a very good way of summarizing our position, which is of real strength in, we are leaders in conservation and we're leaders in art history, and this combination under the guise of this specific MA, I think would be the reason to come to the Courtauld. So I think that we have answered the questions that we have in the chat. I'd encourage you to get in touch with me or with PG Admissions or with Stephen if you have other burning questions about the program. I'd encourage you to apply if you're interested, and I encourage you very much to consider this type of program, because I think that it's something which is unique, and it's also I think a very compelling way of approaching the subject, which really needs specialists who are able to understand the art history and the conservation implications, because that will ensure that sites and objects are preserved into the future, where there is a real risk we have seen this in the Bamayan Buddhist now. We have seen this in sites in the Himalayas which are renovated. We see this in the rapid expansion and advancement of cities, that Buddhist sites are often ignored or very much at risk. And therefore, we feel there's a real need to develop a new group of leaders to ensure that that we can preserve them into the future. Okay, so please get in touch with us if you're interested in joining the Courtauld, or get in touch with, you see the emails here which Stephen so kindly added to this Zoom. And I think with that, I'd wish you a very happy continuation of the week.
Thank you all for coming. Look forward to hearing from you. Take care.